What's good, guys? The 2010s are just about done for the NBA. We've seen a lot of exceptional MVP seasons over these last 10 years, so I decided to rank each and every one of them. I'll be focusing mainly on regular season success, since the MVP is just a regular season award after all. This decade had some pretty legendary and record-shattering MVP seasons, which made this decade one of the most compelling decades for MVP winners in quite some time. Starting at 10, I have Derrick Rose's MVP season. This was a really great season for any player, let alone a player in his third year. Derrick led the Bulls to the best record in the league at 62-20, with Joakim Noah, Luol Deng, and Carlos Boozer as his supporting cast. It was a good season where he averaged 25, 4, and 8 approximately. However, compared to some of the other MVP seasons this decade, Derrick's was somewhat lackluster. Had D Rose not had the injuries, I'm sure he would have had an even more impressive MVP season in the future, during his prime for sure. For a 22-year-old, this MVP season was spectacular, but in this case, it comes in at number 10 for this decade. Unfortunately, the injuries just robbed us of what Derrick Rose's career could have been, but from seeing how he performed in his one MVP season, I'm sure we were in for a really special player if he stayed healthy the whole way. But unfortunately, injuries happen to a lot of the great ones, and he's no exception to that. Coming in at number 9, I have Steph Curry's first MVP season in 2015. This was Steph Curry's first season on his rise to superstardom and the start of the Warriors dynasty. The Warriors had just fired Mark Jackson and hired Steve Kerr. Their entire offense changed and became more focused on motion and passing. Curry flourished under the system, and while the numbers don't look that crazy since he only averaged around 24, 4, and 8, he still managed to lead his team to a 67-15 record in a tough Western Conference. The team record and beginning of a dynastic run are the main reasons why I placed this at number 9. LeBron's 2012 season was really good, but given the circumstances, it wasn't as impressive as some of the other seasons on this list. This was a lockout-shortened season, so the numbers aren't as staggering as they could be. The Heat were 46-20 this season, which was enough for the second best record in the East, behind the Chicago Bulls. LeBron averaged his usual 27, 7, and 6. Since the season was shorter, the advanced stats such as VORP and PER were significantly lower than they usually were. This was a great MVP season, but it's hard to rank this above the rest of the pack, mainly because it was so much shorter, and the league was kind of having issues at the time with the whole lockout situation. So for those reasons, I placed LeBron's 2012 MVP season at 8. His final season in Cleveland before the decision, LeBron's 2009-10 season was exceptional considering how bad his teammates were that year. I put his second MVP season this low only because his other ones were so much better. LeBron averaged approximately 30, 7, and 9 while leading the Cavs to the best record in the entire league. LeBron has had some exceptional seasons, so putting this season as his second worst MVP season this decade is by no means a disservice to LeBron. At number 6, I have Giannis Antetokounmpo's MVP season. This was a tough decision, but I consider this at 6 primarily because of the circumstances of some of the other MVPs on this list. Giannis had a great season leading his team to the best record in the league of 60-22 with a monster stat line of 28, 13, and 6 approximately. He's only 24 and he already had an amazing MVP season. I put his season a couple notches below because Harden also had a historic season at the same time, and I feel like that somewhat detracted from Giannis' season. However, it was definitely a deserving achievement. Looking at the advanced stats, VORP placed Giannis' season fairly low compared to some of the other MVP seasons, while PER placed him in the top 10, so take that for what you will. Despite them losing the Eastern Conference Finals, the Milwaukee Bucks are primed to be in contention for the finals once again, and I look forward to seeing the reigning MVP in action next season. Entering the top 5, I have KD's MVP season at number 5. The season seems kind of underrated because it was a little while ago, and it didn't have that much of a narrative attached to it like some of these other MVP seasons, but don't get me wrong, this was an amazing season from Kevin Durant. Westbrook was out for most of the regular season, and KD put the team on his back to carry them to the playoffs. KD recorded the 34th highest single-season VORP of all time, which is pretty good amongst all the other MVP seasons in NBA history. KD averaged 32, 7, and 6 approximately on 50, 40, 90 shooting, while also leading the team to a record of 59 and 23 in a competitive Western Conference with teams like the Spurs, the Grit and Grind Grizzlies, and the Clippers, who were all tough opponents. KD earned his 4th scoring title on extremely efficient shooting, and for all the reasons I mentioned above, KD's MVP season was the 5th best MVP season of this decade. This was a tough decision between Harden's MVP season and Westbrook's, but I decided to give Harden's season the higher spot since his team had a significantly better record. At 4th, I have Russell Westbrook's MVP season. This season was amazing from Westbrook. After KD bolted for Oakland, Westbrook was left with the remains of the franchise. Tasked with keeping the Thunder afloat, Westbrook had one of the most historic MVP seasons in recent memory. Westbrook averaged 32, 10, and 10 approximately, while leading the Thunder to 47 wins in a really tough Western Conference. Westbrook had one of the greatest single-season carry jobs I've ever seen. The fact that Russell averaged a triple-double for the first time in over 50 years was enough of a historic feat for him to clinch the MVP award. It was a controversial MVP season since Russ's team was only the 6th seed, but nevertheless, it was the 4th best MVP season of this decade in my eyes. Entering the top 3, I have James Harden's MVP season. The 2018 Rockets were an absolute juggernaut of a squad, with James Harden putting up historic numbers every single night, on top of brilliance from Chris Paul and Clint Capella. The Rockets won a multiple 18-game winning streaks that year, while Harden led the team to a record of 65-17. Harden averaged 35-9 while leading the league in scoring. Harden had a huge 50-point games littered around throughout the season, including the first 60-point triple-double in NBA history. This was an exceptional season all around. The Rockets truly peaked that year, but it fizzled out in the playoffs to their dismay. Harden had an even better season this past year, but I think being the 4th seed in the West and voter fatigue from the media members were enough for the media to vote against him. These last two were incredibly tough to determine. It was a toss-up between historic feats and narrative. At the 2nd spot, I have LeBron James' 2013 MVP season. This was LeBron at his absolute peak. Miami LeBron was arguably the most complete basketball player of all time, and he displayed that with fury and dominance this season. The Heat were 66-16, coming off LeBron's first championship. LeBron was dominating on the offensive and defensive sides of the ball every single night. He averaged 27, 8, and 7 with elite defense. He finished 2nd in Defensive Player of the Year voting, only behind Marc Gasol, who some may argue may have robbed LeBron of the award. The Heat went on a 27-game winning streak during that season, which was the 2nd longest win streak in NBA history, behind the 1972 Lakers, who won 33 games in a row. LeBron's had some legendary seasons, but this one was truly the height of his powers. It's crazy to think that the Heat were on the brink of losing the title with LeBron absolutely dominating, had it not been for the greatness and heroics of Ray Allen and Chris Bosh. This may be a controversial pick. There's definitely an argument that could be made for LeBron taking the number 1 spot, but regardless, I put Steph Curry's 2016 MVP season as number 1. The season felt magical in a weird way. For the regular season at least, the Warriors just seemed unbeatable. They'd always miraculously find a way to win close games. Steph Curry was playing at his absolute peak, and it was just legendary every single night. Steph averaged 30 points on 50, 45, and 90% shooting, while also leading the league in scoring and steals. The Warriors ended up breaking the single-season wins record, going 73-9 behind the brilliance of Steph Curry. The season felt really special, and I think even people who hated the Warriors were tuning in to watch their games. Steph had one of the greatest offensive seasons in NBA history, on top of breaking the single-season 3-point record, among a bunch of other records. Despite how the playoffs went for the Warriors that year, the 2016 Warriors were one of the greatest teams of all time when they were healthy and when they were clicking. After the injuries in the playoffs, it felt like Steph Curry lost that magic that he had every night in the regular season. Regardless, this was the greatest MVP season of the decade, and it takes the number 1 spot on this list. What are your personal rankings of the MVP seasons of this decade? We've been blessed with a lot of great MVP seasons, along with a lot of great narratives and storylines so far, and I'm intrigued to see what's going to happen next in the NBA in this upcoming season. That's all for this one. Thanks so much for watching. Subscribe if you enjoyed it, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.
Just in case the party gets rowdy, I brought my crew. I don't mind if y'all wanna fight me, just don't shoot. I see you got on all this